Okay, so we're recording. Okay, we'll start the study of Daniel. This is a stepping stone, I hope, for Revelation, which we're going to go to next. And there's so many similarities and so much in Revelation drawn from Daniel. I thought it would be a good thing for us to go through in preparation. Yeah. So we will, and this is going to be a challenge because there's controversy on several of the books that we've studied in the past, but not as much controversy as there is when you get to the prophecy. There's a range of people's ideas of how to interpret some of the stuff. So as we go through, what I say is just my understanding that I've gleaned through looking at different points of view. So don't feel bad at all about contradicting me with the way you interpreted or who you've heard in the past, and add it to, contribute it to the discussion. So this is our project, not my job to teach y'all as much as it's our job to figure out what it says and what it means to us. So that, with that in mind, the first question is, who was Daniel? There was actually 3 Daniels in the Old Testament that were noteworthy, but there was only one known as Daniel the prophet. So this is the person that we're talking about in this book. And in fact, Jesus gave us that confirmation himself in Matthew 24:15. His words were, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." So Jesus identified Daniel as the prophet and obviously had read his works from the Old Text. He lived between the years of 620 BC and 538 BC, which approximations. But circa is kind of the way we'll abbreviate it. And we know that he was born into the royal family. So he was not one of the medium or lower class people. He was at the top of society that he was in. And it also tells us in the book that he was a good looking guy and he was extremely smart, above average intelligence. He was a highly qualified guy, even in his teens. And in his teens, I've seen references between 14 and 15, somewhere in that area, Jerusalem was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel was taken prisoner, hostage, joined with the caravan back to Babylon, and along with several others. So he was taken away from his homeland and his people. Well, his people were actually brought with him, but they were taken away from the country. The book of Daniel was written by him towards the end of his life. I would probably tell us more details, but there's controversy between the experts, the critics, as to whether Daniel wrote it, whether it's written 400 years later, whether Daniel was. Anyway, there's always controversy, but I think the predominant agreed upon understanding today by most scholars is it was written by his hand and towards the end of his life. Is that a fair representation of that?
Yeah, especially 9 and 12 chapter of Daniel almost have to be written by the 3.
One of the noteworthy things about Daniel is he used 2 different languages. He used Hebrew for chapter 1 and then chapters 8 through 12. and then he used Aramaic for chapters 2 through 7. So we switched back and forth between the languages he wrote in. That's one of the points of controversy that people have said, well, it couldn't be the same guy. Why would he switch languages in the middle of the process? Was he wrote a story about his life. So if I wanted to write a story about my years in 14 and 15, if I didn't have notes from them, I wouldn't be able to write it. So I'm sure Daniel had to hopefully kept notes, kept references, went back and visited with others and saying, "Oh, now remember when we got captured and taken to Babylon? What, you know?" In other words, he had to piece this together, and he probably did it over a long period of time. So at one point or another, it made sense to use one language versus the other. Daniel lived his whole life in exile. He was taken as a teenager and was in Babylon all the way through the Nebuchadnezzar's reign into Cyrus's reign, and then Cyrus released the Israelites. So he was separated from the temple, separated from the group that he belonged to. He was kind of in a foreign land, a strange place, but yet he still maintained his relationship with God, his obedience to God. He never compromised or sacrificed his godly principles. In fact, in Ezekiel 14:14, it reads, "Even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver but their own lives by their righteousness, declares the Lord God." So God himself put Daniel at a pretty high level in that he got grouped with those other two as being righteous in God's eyes. So that's, like I said, living in a foreign land under the control of people who did not believe in God at all. In fact, practice worship of other gods and idols, and yet he maintained his righteousness in God's eyes. So with that, we'll start verse 1. "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it." So it starts right off. He's a teenager. He's living the good life in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem gets attacked. Nebuchadnezzar was conquering the whole world. He was creating a worldwide empire, and Jerusalem just happened to be one of the dominoes that fell. And Jehoiakim was at the end of the series of kings that ruled Jerusalem and the Israelites. And this pretty much terminated that reign.
He was a good king. He didn't serve God.
And in Jeremiah 25:1, Jeremiah says, "The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah," that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So Jeremiah confirmed the prediction that Jerusalem would fall, and that Nebuchadnezzar would be the victor. So verse 2, "And the Lord handed Jehoiakim, king of Judah, over to him, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God." So basically, God allowed Jerusalem to fall. He allowed the temple to be ransacked. He allowed the treasures to be taken by a pagan king and taken and added to his treasury. And this was by the Lord handed. So in other words, God is in charge. He decides these things. And so this was part of the punishment of Israel because of their failure to and subject them, submit themselves to God's rule. This invasion happened at 605 BC. That's a pretty tight date. I mean, that's historically verified through multiple sources. So, and in Luke 21:24, this is Jesus' words, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. This siege, this conquering of Jerusalem, basically switched the earthly kingdoms from Israelites to Gentiles. That's the beginning of the Gentile period, and that's occurred and then continues to today. The land of Shinar that it speaks about here is just an ancient name for Babylonia. It's the same geographical place. Nebuchadnezzar burned Solomon's temple. Biggest, nicest places on earth at the time. Solomon saw in Ecclesiastes how big and grand it was, and Nebuchadnezzar basically just pillaged and burnt most of it to the ground. Okay, back on to verse 3 and 4. Then the king told Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom there was no impairment, who were good looking, suitable for instruction in every kind of expertise, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability to serve in the king's court. And he ordered Ashpenaz to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. You know, this was a common practice, and as I was thinking about this, we actually still do it today. When you go to another country, you conquer them. You take some of their people and you try to integrate them into your organization. In Iraq, we invite and recruit translators and representatives, local people, because we need to know how the local community, we need maps, we need to be able to communicate with different dialects and different tribes. It's important to have that group of people. In the old West days, the cavalry units would collect Indians to have Indian guides to help them figure out, how to, what's the shortcuts getting from here to there. So it's not uncommon at all for a conquering army to collect people and then try to make them loyal to the new owners, to the new,
He's still getting with the job. You're not in here.
Yeah, so much for coffee.
So, so Nebuchadnezzar put out the word, hey, collect some of the youngest, brightest, sharpest, and in fact, get some of the royal family guys, because if we can get them in here, then they're hostages, but we don't have to treat them bad, treat them good, but maybe we can turn them, maybe we can make them loyal to us instead of loyal to the previous families. Gives you some insurance. They're not going to attack you if you have their children in your possession. They're going to think twice about attacking you and trying to take Jerusalem back, because then their children are in danger of being killed process or because of it. And then there's several reasons, purposes for that. The hostage thing, the bridges to treaties. It's to deal with a government in exile. If you can make an arrangement with them to not try to overthrow you. And then lastly, they would train local people and then put them in charge. Because if you can get local people, if you can get a Jew to maintain control, set them up as the governor of a province or the area, then you've got somebody that the people will not resist because they're one of them, but yet they work for you. So there's lots of reasons why he would do this. And normally, he specifically said, we want the smart ones, we want good looking ones, we want the ones with, social graces, because they're going to be working for us, they're going to be representing us, so we want them to be impressive to whoever they deal with. Okay. Verse 5. The king also allotted for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and ordered that they be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. So they're going to be on his inside his court, at the very top of the government. And when I read this, I thought, 3 years, that's almost like a college degree. If you think about it, we go to college for 4 years, 9 months out of 4 years, which is 36 months, which is 3 years. So it's kind of strange that thousands of years ago, they got a degree in 3 years and we get a degree in 3 years. It's kind of a consistent thing. But it shows that they're not being mistreated. They're being treated like royalty. They're being treated like they. Water back to the mountains.
I can get you some.
Oh, would you? And this training obviously was the whole breadth of range. They were learning languages, they were learning culture, they were learning the governmental or administrative structure of Babylon empire. So they had a wide range of studies that they were participating in. Yes, it's going to come. Okay, so now we go to the hard one, the tongue twister, verses 6 and 7. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We just started the next verse, 6 and 7. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Was close.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
And this is a process of integrating someone into a new society. And one of the first things you try to peel off their identity. In other words, you want to make them feel like they're different, they're new, they're in a different place. So changing their name is a good tactic. When you've taken POW, all of our POW training, how to survive the POW situation. One of the first things they do is take your name away from you, they give you a number, they assign you a code name. In other words, they don't use your name. They don't want you to feel like you are you. They want you to feel like you're someone else. That also separates them from their old life and hopefully from their allegiances to their old life. They wanted them to become new citizens or citizens of Babylon. And in this case, it was even more than just that. It was, they literally wanted to separate them from God. And one of the ways they did it was their name, because the meaning of Daniel is God is my judge. That's the meaning of the name Daniel. And the meaning of Belteshazzar is protect the king. So they're changing his name from a godly name to a king's name, separating his actual namesake. Hananiah, the meaning of it was the Lord is gracious. Changed Shadrach, which is command of Aku, which is the Babylonian god. So they're literally changing the meaning of their new names from God to idols, to false gods. Mishael, who is like the Lord, was changed to Meshach, which is who is what Aku is, who is the Babylonian god. Azariah, which meant the Lord is my helper, to Abednego, which means servant of Nego, which is a god of vegetation. Why I don't know. So the names, they change the meaning of the person's identity away from God towards idols and as a part of the process. So verse 8 and 9. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. Now Daniel was in an awkward situation. He was a young man, but he was devout. He was committed to God. Yet God put him in this situation under the authority of a pagan king by allowing this pagan king to conquer Jerusalem. So in a way, he was under the king's authority by God's will. And yet the king now is wanting him to eat food that was blessed by rituals to pagan gods that was not considered clean by the law of Moses. It was not. So he had this situation. How do I maintain my allegiance to God and at the same time submit to the authority of this king where God has put me?
One thing I've always found interesting about Daniel, we know everybody has sinned. There's never a sin of Daniel.
Never what?
There's never a sin. We know it's sin, obviously, but we've all sinned. There's never a sin of his mentioned in the Bible. And everybody else, so possibly Esther has some particular sins.
That's why God considered him one of the three righteous men in history on earth. And that's probably the biggest point out of this first chapter. I mean, this is a setup, this is a historical reference, this is in a place to go forward. But the lesson I get out of chapter 1 is that no matter where you're at, no matter what the incentive is, the world is constantly providing to us options that are not godly. And And it's so easy to just compromise just this one time. It's okay. We'll drink this wine. We'll eat this food. God put us here. He let the king take us, so he obviously wants us to become like them. And that's what we have to fight against. The world offers us so many opportunities to compromise our relationship with God. And Daniel didn't. He maintained it all the way through. In 3 years. We'll get to it, but anyway. So he asked permission. He came up with, okay, I can eat the stuff and disappoint God, or I can rebel against this and maybe possibly become prison or jail or beheaded, or I can try to work a deal with the guy who's providing the food and get him to let me not eat the food, give me something else to eat. And that's what he did. He asked the guy in charge if he could have a special diet, him and his 3 friends. And God opened that door because Daniel was trying to do the right thing. God gave him the response by the guy in charge that didn't allow that to happen. But then in verse 10, the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord and king, who has allotted your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking gaunt in comparison to the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. So the guy in charge is saying, okay, yeah, I'll go along with you, but I don't want to die. I don't want to get killed so that you can eat what you're going to eat because you're God. And so Daniel came up with this plan. He said in verse 11, but Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please put your servants to the test for 10 days. Let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined in your presence and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. In other words, give us a chance to show that it'll work. Well, you have to think about, in those days, it was customary to see more people well-fed, in other words, heavy people, not skinny people. In other words, manual laborers, they were skinny. They didn't have enough food. They didn't eat much. They were not starving, but not well-fed.
Working it off.
People of the court were expected to look a little pudgy. They were supposed to be a little overweight because they don't do physical manual work. They don't even sweep their own floors. They don't even fan themselves. They have people doing that. So basically, no physical exertion and a lot of rich food. And Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to look that way because that's where you're supposed to look.
Prosperity, to look prosperous,
Yeah.
to be heavy and full.
Exactly. Today we're prosperous all over. I was reading something last week about the obesity rates in the United States are now. It's growing.
Off the charts.
So anyway, this overseer, is reasonably concerned because, hey, if you guys just eat water and vegetables, you're not going to gain weight, you're going to lose weight. And then we're going to be found out, and I'm going to end up, on the gallows without my head. So this is not a good plan. And Daniel says, hey, we got it. We can take care of it. We've got the power of God behind us. And so the commander goes along with it. So Daniel created the first vegetarian diet. It didn't work. They gained weight. So, okay, so in verse 14, so we listened to them in this matter and put them to the test for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their appearance seemed better and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. So they're doing good. They're looking, they're keeping up with the rest of the guys. They're even looking better than the other guys, and they're eating nothing but water and vegetable. Now, think about this. They're turning down platters of steaks and game and fowl and
Desserts.
yeah, and as much wine as you can drink, and these guys are eating water and vegetables. Not for this 10 days, for the whole 3 years. 3 years, that's all they eat. And yet, they stay as big as the other guys. So the power of God. You've got to wonder, the overseer, what do you do with all that food and all that wine?
Is he getting larger?
He was taking it home. His family ate well. And,
Yeah. Maybe he just must have grown it.
Spread it out.
and you bring up kind of that was the custom. Probably Daniel and the rest of the group was probably all events. Was one of the first steps that they normally took for the Baptist. We don't know that, but it's pretty.
It's within their possibilities.
Okay, 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence and every kind of literature and expertise. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. So their curriculum covered everything, including mythological, divination, and the history and worship of idols. So they weren't just trained in language and math and history. They were taught the bad things of society. But yet these young men excelled. They even, Daniel was even farther ahead than the other 3, but all 4 of them was way ahead of the rest of the class. And then verse 18. Then at the end of the days with which the king had specified before presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, or Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service, and for every matter of expertise and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the soothsayers, priests, and conjurers who were in all his realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So they graduated valedictorians of the class. That they were personally interviewed by the king, and he assessed their knowledge, their ability, their demonstrated expertise in multiple areas, and not just found them suitable or acceptable, found 10 times better than the smartest people in his court. So the people who were his experts are now 1/10 as qualified and smart and as these 4 young men. So he immediately drafted them into his inner court as his advisors. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar, well, it was my training program. It was the food that I created these guys through my process. It was me that made these guys this smart. No, it wasn't. We know it wasn't, but that was what the king thought. Maybe even the overseer knew, he knew what was going on. And it says that, Daniel stayed in the court and worked for Nebuchadnezzar until Nebuchadnezzar wasn't there. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, we'll start getting into some of the prophecy. So
I have a question.
okay.
I always say it might be a dumb question, but why was the jailer so easily swayed?
Compound favor.
So it was
God.
favor, God's
And it
supernatural
says
favor.
God.
Because I thought, why is he just, oh yeah, okay, I'll help you out here.
God favored Daniel by letting the guard, convincing the guard. God made the guard decide,
Yes.
even though he was afraid. He didn't want to. He wasn't getting anything out of it.
Right,
He could
that's,
have gotten in big trouble. So there would be no reason if it wasn't.
but some,
God's
somewhere
persuasion.
inside, he feared the possibility of God rather than king.
Yeah, and he gave it a test period too. So I doubt they were being inspected every 10 days, but there's a little trial.
If they didn't look good in 10 days, I'm sure he would have bailed out. And then probably told them. So, okay, well, that's chapter 1, and we'll pick it up again next week.
Bye, Larry.
Bye, Larry.
Bye-bye. Take care, guys.
Okay, we'll try to get a microphone before next week.
Okay, all right.